America, and welcome to Invent America, because America invents.
This episode of Invent America TV is brought to you by America's Inventor Lady and Home Talk USA. Home Talk is a proud member of the King's Broadcasting Network and has been bringing to you the best of America's home-based product innovation since 1998. This segment of Invent America TV is brought to you by the law offices of Ray Burrasca. RPB law offices have been bringing corporate-level legal expertise to the independent inventor community for more than 20 years. For all your inventing legal needs, trust rpblawoffices.com.
Thank you so much for being with us today for this episode of Invent America, because America invents. Been doing it for hundreds of years, and we will continue to invent and make things better and make products better. And it's really exciting to be part of that world. And yet, I get frustrated. I find myself frustrated when I see inventors constantly making the same mistake over and over. So we're going to talk a little bit about that process. So if you've got an idea out there and you want to know the best way to do it, you can say, you know what, I heard this from Rita, and we are not going to make those mistakes. So my guest right now is Ray Burrasca. He is an industry expert in helping inventors understand that reality check. All right. He's been doing this for 40 years. A long time, specializing in finance. So registered attorney in New York and Connecticut, specializing in finance and business setup. And Ray, I know there's a couple of points here after working with inventors for a long time where you've seen the same mistakes over and over again. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself so they know that you know what you're doing. And then we're going to get into some very specific questions about some of those mistakes.
Okay. Well, as Rita had indicated, I have been practicing law and finance for over 40 years at this point, when you combine the two of them. I have practiced finance on Wall Street. I have practiced finance in Silicon Valley during the dot-com eras. I have practiced finance in Colorado in the startup community for 20 years. And in addition, I also ran the largest crowdfunding site dedicated to investment in crowdfunded projects for over 8 years in Colorado. So when it comes to finance and business, my experience runs the entire gamut.
Well, and that's really valuable to inventors, because a lot of inventors that they walk around in fantasy land thinking that they're going to build $1 million business, and their experience is, in some cases it's being, a mom, some cases it's being a contractor. Well, there's a lot that goes into building $1 million business, and a lot of them just don't see the errors early on that they're making.
That's correct. And unfortunately, there is a culture out there initiated by the startup shows that everybody is going to get rich by having their invention become a startup. And the sad truth is it almost never works that way. And there's reasons why it never works that way.
Well, when we're talking about, I think a lot of inventors don't realize you can invent a product and get it to market without being a startup.
Correct.
And so, that fantasy land of being then the startup is really misplaced.
Absolutely. Even during the dot-com era, of all the clients that I had, and these were clients that had been venture capital funded, only one of them survives to this day. And that one was actually acquired by another company. So when you look at all of the activity in Silicon Valley during that period of time, during the dot-com era, and you look at all of the dead bodies that are strewn across the landscape because of it, what you begin to realize is if you're lucky enough to get venture capital, and it is an extreme improbability that you will, because it's less than 0.1% of everybody who applies, even if you get the money, the chances of you ultimately succeeding, given all of the pushes and pulls that exist with respect to a venture capital funded company, are so great that almost always the company implodes in some fashion, or it gets acquired and it's sold off, and then the acquirer disassembles it and reassigns the engineers from that company into other projects that the big company wants to have attended to. So the illusion that a solo independent inventor is going to somehow be the next Mark Zuckerberg is so delusional as to be laughable. And inventor associations that continue to promote the concept of startup for solo independent inventors are doing the inventing community a great disservice. A great disservice.
Let's break that down just a little bit, because, a lot of the people I deal with are, they don't know. It's like, when they're in, elementary school, it's like, oh, I'm going to grow up and be an inventor. They're on the job, they're working, they see a better way of doing something. They're, in the kitchen, they see a better way. And it's that aha moment. Well, aha, and a better product idea in their head does not equal, that startup mentality. And so they generally just accidentally fall into it, because you're right. There's so many different organizations out there, whether it's, a local chamber, an SBA, or whatever, they go startup, startup, startup. There's a difference between working your product and getting it into the marketplace and being the startup. And a lot of times the startup jumps over the early steps that need to be done. And it just throws them into spending money. Well, it costs a lot of money to be able to get a product to market, but it's not the money that is spent on the startup. It's supposed to be money spent on developing the product, right?
Exactly right. And that is where they make their greatest mistake, is they spend a lot of their money on attorneys, on accountants, on creating business plans, on creating projections that go out 5 years when they don't even yet know that they have a business. And so, unfortunately, it's this culture that we're in these days, where in the past, let's say going back to the early 1980s, before Apple blew off the doors of venture capital and of financing and investment with its IPO, when you go back to that period of time prior to that incident, when an inventor had a product, the way he typically would grow his business is organically, which means a little bit at a time. Don't bite off a bigger chew than you can swallow at any moment. And business plans were the last thing that they did after they, one, invented the idea, two, had a search done to make sure they weren't stealing somebody else's intellectual property, three, had a patent application done that was finally accepted and became a patent, four, created a prototype that matched the patent, five, went to a trade show to get some feedback when it came to the marketability of the product. That's what inventors used to do, step by step by step. It takes money to make money, especially when you are an inventor. And when people think they can just go out and raise money from other people for an idea, that's where they're most sadly mistaken.
Well, we always laugh and say ideas are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. And just because yours is cute doesn't mean I can sell it. And so what we look at then is like, don't waste money on the business plan. You don't have a business yet. Get a search done. All right. You don't have a business yet. See if you can file the patent. Get a prototype. Can you actually make it work? I've seen renderings of life on Mars. It doesn't mean that there really is life on Mars. So can you make it work? And so there's steps that certainly get done prior to a business plan, because you don't have a business yet. And so we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about this. And you're going to give some advice on those early steps, but even for people that have been down the road a little bit, I think it's almost more dangerous for them to run after investor funding than it is for the newbie who doesn't even know if they've got anything. We're going to talk about those variations a little bit. So everybody, we're going to go and pay some bills. So stick with us. And if you've got an inventor out there that that is kind of struggling, have them join us at the Inventors Roundtable meetings. They're free. You can ask questions. And sometimes what an inventor learns from the inventor sitting next to them is the most valuable thing they can walk away with. And a lot of those inventors, they've been there, done that, made the mistakes, and they'll say, oh my gosh, don't do it this way. Think about this over here. If you're just getting started, you want to show off, go with us to ASD Market Week. That is the best place to gather market research. It's critical to get that market research. And you know what? It can be really timely and really expensive if you just hire somebody to do it. ASD Market Week, you learn more in 3 days and it costs you a fraction of the price. So stick with us, everybody. We're going to talk about the money, honey, when we come back.
This segment of Invent America TV is brought to you by SearchQuest Patent Search. SearchQuest provides for a comprehensive patent search that searches the entire world and not just the U.S. Patent Office. Make sure that before you spend those big bucks having a patent written, you've done your due diligence by getting a comprehensive patent search. Use SearchQuestPatents.com for all your patent search needs. They scour the world for you.
Thank you for being with us for this segment of Invent America. It is brought to you by Product Quick Start and Noah McNeely. If you've got an idea that you're working with and you need someone to do a prototype for you or set up manufacturing, Noah McNeely is the man. And my guest right now is Ray Burrasca, longtime attorney and finance expert. And we're talking about, inventors making those early mistakes so that when, they say, all right, I want to go to a trade show, but I'm out of money. I want to, do this marketing, but I'm out of money. And how do I sell this? Because now I'm out of money. And it's like, I really don't know. You're out of money, honey. So I'm not really sure what advice to give you. And I think most spouses get really angry when you take out a second mortgage on something that is just, a roll of the dice. So, Ray, rather than being a startup, what is the option for an inventor that's got a really good product?
Try to grow organically. In fact, the businesses that survive over the longer haul, and this is statistically proven, are businesses that grow slowly, incrementally, and do it organically. Outside money always comes at a higher price than you think. In many cases, it starts with just chasing it. And chasing money diverts your attention from the important things if you are going to grow your business. If you're going to grow your business, you need to pay attention to the business, not chasing things, which in most cases are inaccessible.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing.
So what I see when I'm working with inventors is that they'll say, well, I need an investor. So they will start wasting time chasing the money. And, they forget they have an option of being able to go and license it to a company that is going to make it, sell it, and send them a check. And for some of the guys that they've got a business, they've got, they're contractors, and they invent a product that makes life better in that arena that they work on. Well, it makes sense. They're doing it every day, so they see what needs to be made better. All right, as far as the tools and the products in their business. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be an expert at manufacturing and selling the product. They're good at what they do. So when they have the opportunity then to license it, and licensing means basically you're renting your intellectual property to somebody else who's going to run with it. But that tends to be less risky for them rather than losing the entire business.
Not only that, but if someone is a passionate inventor, and let's assume for argument's sake that you have an individual who just would like nothing more in life than just to constantly invent new products. Okay, one of the best ways for them to actually ultimately someday be in a position to actually attract investment from outside is if they are successful initially. So let's say they have their initial product. If they actually do the right steps to make their product interesting to a licensee, and that licensee is able to blow the doors off of the market with that product, guess what? They have a success. Nothing succeeds like success. That means they are in a better place after that first licensed product that has done very well to actually convince people that their ideas are worth investing in. In addition, if they do a second license, let's say, and that product is also successful, now it's not just a fluke anymore. Now it's actually a bona fide success because they did it twice. They replicated their success. Nothing attracts outside money more than greater assurance that the money won't be just burnt through, but in fact will return to its investor. And when you have two successes like that back to back, guess what? You're in a very different elevated position than you would be if you were starting from scratch with a single product.
Well, I think, a lot of inventors, they've got some money, so they tee it up, they pay for, too many things up front that are wasteful spending, and they don't realize it, but they do. And then, they get to the point where they might do a short run, what we call a short, with their first run. So they might get 1,000 made, sometimes 2,500 made, and they're able to sell those. They realize they could make some improvements to it, and they start getting it out the door. But when they realize then that reality of the multiple of 5, and we talk about it frequently, well, now they've blown through their savings that they've got in hand, and they're still dealing with the multiple of 5. So easy breakdown is that if your product is a retail $10 product, that means you've got to be able to make it, package it, insure it for delivery for 2. And so a lot of inventors, when they start doing that math, it's not going to add up for them. They're not going to be on the winning end of that math. And so, you realize a retailer sold it for 10, they bought it for 5. A distributor, because you can't sell them all yourself, bought it from you for $2.50. You made 50 cents per unit, and that's got to pay for all of your marketing. Marketing costs as much as manufacturing. All right. But you don't have the money now in the bank to pay for 10,000 units. You're still stuck at 1,500 units per order, and you can't hit your price points. So you die. The product dies, and you just curl up and crawl your way home. If you'd known more or asked better questions, you would have had a better chance.
Absolutely. And if you were careful in how you spent your money, I mean, one of the things that I like about your organization is you adopted a mantra fairly early on in your evolution of don't spend a dime before it's time. What that tells an inventor, if they're paying attention, is it doesn't say don't spend any money. It says don't spend money foolishly and don't spend it before you have to spend it. Hold on to it as long as you can. And then when you have to spend it wisely.
Well, I think a lot of inventors don't realize that, as you start going through those steps, and it's like, well, I don't really want to spend that much money on a patent, so I'll do it myself. No, pro se, no way. You can't do it yourself, all right? Because the only thing that allows you to license or to actually protect your product out there is to be able to file a patent on it. And yeah, there's some products that are out there, they don't care. They just want to be able to get it out there and do that. Okay, fine. You take the risk, but you need to understand the risk and what's going on. So when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those, cool new products that we're taking to ASD Market Week and the places where they are and some of the decisions the inventors have to make because they're down at crunch time as far as their dollars go. And we're going to talk about where your dollars do the most work for you on your behalf. So stick with us, everybody. We're going to go and pay some bills. And again, if you are an inventor out there and you've got questions, join us at the IRT meetings, the Inventor Roundtables, where we can answer your questions. It's kind of like the call-in version of the radio show. So we'll be right back with our industry expert. Stick with us. If you're an inventor or you know an inventor out there who would just like to be able to have a conversation with other inventors, join the Inventors Roundtable. It's free. The meetings are virtual, so you can be anywhere in America and talk to another inventor. And for a lot of folks out there, understanding the process, being able to ask questions, getting good service provider information is critical to the inventing process. So, got questions? Want to join? It's free. inventorsroundtable.org. And thank you so much for joining us for this segment of Invent America. Show me the money, honey. It is really to get that idea out of your head, all right, and into the marketplace. It takes money and very wise decision making. And we're talking about some of those decisions that inventors have to make all the time. This segment is brought to you by Wood. If you have got water running down on your head from those gutters leaking, you know what? WeNeedGutters.com. That's where you are going to find the answer, and that's where you're going to make it stop running down on your head. Been there, done that. Wasn't any fun. Now it doesn't, because I used WeNeedGutters.com. My guest for this hour of Invent America is Ray Burrasca. He is the money expert for a lot of our inventors. And, when I get an inventor that says, oh, I'm going to go after an investor, it's like, don't do that. man, you need to know a lot more about that whole arena. It's like, it's hard enough to go to market with a product. You're opening a whole nother can of worms when you say, I'm going to go after an investor. So, a lot of the inventors, they start running out of money, and instead of going to a show, they want to get an investor. Why is that a mistake?
Well, the chances of them actually getting an investor in the time period that they should be getting that investor in order for their invention not to go flat is way too short. And so they will inevitably run out of money. It's almost a guarantee that they will run out of money. Looking for an investor when you're desperate for an investor is the worst time to look for an investor. The best time to look for an investor is when you don't need an investor. And the best time to look for it's the same thing as if you were borrowing money from a bank. The best time to go to the bank is not when you desperately need the money. It's when you've gone to the bank repeatedly over time, developed the relationship, put some money in the bank so they're making money off of you. And then all of a sudden you have a need for a loan. You go and talk to your friendly loan officer. But unfortunately, people don't think about those things until it's too late. And the too late syndrome is what kills most inventions.
And another place that inventors go frequently, it's a huge mistake, is they think, well, I'll raise money on a Kickstarter campaign. Well, you ran a group that did the crowdfunding and realized that it has become now a very predatory space. Like every other space, it doesn't matter how expensive the suit is, the shark is still going to eat you. And so it's really the same thing on crowdfunding these days, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter whether you're looking at what's called investment-based crowdfunding, which looks more like traditional venture capital funding, but on a small scale, or you're looking at what we call the perquisites crowdfunding, like Kickstarter and GoFundMe, and those, each of them have their own criteria that someone that wants to start a campaign has no clue exists. And those criteria have become more and more hardened and reflect to a greater and greater degree venture capital thinking. When you are thinking like a venture capitalist, you are very greedy. The reason that you're risking your money is that the probability of it being returned to you is remote. But if you strike it and it's good, you're going to get a real windfall. Okay. And so when you start building in those kind of criteria to these platforms, and it's happened with every single platform. There is no platform out there, I can assure you, except the ones that maybe failed and are gone. There's no successful platform out there that is not predatory in some fashion and keeps you ignorant until you are stuck in the middle of a funding campaign. And all of a sudden, that's when all the boogeymen and the phantoms start coming out of the closet that you get assaulted with for the first time.
So many people don't understand. They're in love with the fantasy idea of raising money by pre-selling their product. I have seen people raise $500,000, $500,000, and be bankrupt in 2 weeks because they didn't understand the rules.
Absolutely. And that is not an unusual story. That happens frequently. But what's even more disheartening is sometimes the platform will lead you to believe at the beginning that you can get money from their crowd. But when you're actually deep within the funding campaign itself, all of a sudden they emerge and say, well, we think you should put in $100,000 of your own money or your relatives' money. And they go and they force you basically to do something you would never think about doing, which is borrowing money from family, because borrowing money from family is one of the worst ideas you can ever have, because you can't escape from family. They are going to be with you constantly. And if you screw them, you are going to have really bad family relationships.
That is for sure. So you never want to go down that road. And there's so many things. A crowdfunding campaign can work as long as you know all the rules and you've got products sitting in a warehouse on the ground in the United States, so you would know exactly what the cost is. But when you're saying, oh, I'm going to do a campaign to raise the money to pay for the manufacturing, no, that's when you get toasted. Because if the price goes up, if something is held in stock, and if you take that money, you are obligated to fill those orders.
Absolutely.
And they don't realize that. And you can be, in a world of hurt. I've seen so many inventors raise money. We knew a gentleman who was actually on Shark Tank. It had successful businesses, $1 million businesses over and over again. And after being on Shark Tank, it was what, 2 months and he was bankrupt with that business?
Absolutely. He was a client of mine, actually. And he
And,
was very, very successful over a number of businesses, over almost a half a dozen businesses where he sold them at a profit. And he had this one really cool business that had an even better idea than his current product. And he went to Shark Tank and he took a small investment from them. And within 6 months, I'd say he was in bankruptcy. So there are ways that even successful people can be ambushed by taking outside investor money.
it's amazing. So the rules then are, don't spend a dime before it's time. When it's time, you have to step up to the plate, but then you at least know how to budget things. All right, there are ways to squeeze the money so that you can get the most out of it and get your product teed up for a trade show. And that's where a lot of people think they'll hire a market research team. Well, goodness gracious, the market research team's got no blood in the game, all right, because they're going to send you an invoice. And that's what we're going to talk about is still, some of those invoices that inventors get that they just didn't expect and that didn't offer anything in return. And marketing is one of the big ones, isn't it?
Absolutely. And one of the great ploys of these marketing research firms is they'll do a little bit of work. They'll give you some preliminary analysis. And then they'll say, whoa, we have this plan. We can execute this plan. And the very first step in the plan is they want to redesign your website, which is a complete waste of your money, especially if you already have a website in place. So that's a fairly common thing that happens again and again with these market research firms.
And, market research firms, they go out, they may talk to, let's say 1,000 consumers. If you go to a trade show and you're talking to the professionals there, all right, now you're talking to people who represent thousands of consumers. And you can talk to more people in 3 or 4 days than you can talk to 6 months online. And you get some serious feedback. We're going to talk about some of that when we come back. But, when people need the money, all right, they can take out a loan. All right, they can do where they're not involving a stranger in their business. And when they control it themselves and they're making their own decisions, they have a much better chance of being successful. But we're going to look at some of those ways that they can actually reach out and get the help. So, Ray, before we take the next break, what is a one-liner piece of advice you want to give to an inventor?
The secret in life is to not be too greedy.
And there you go. We had an inventor up in the New England area who was given an offer for a licensing deal, and his partner said, we can do better than that. Nope, it tanked. They didn't do better than that. So when he took another product to market, all right, and he got a licensing deal, he took it first thing out the door and was thrilled because then he got to go to the bank and make a deposit. So stick with us, everybody. We are going to be right back after we go and pay some bills, and we're going to wrap up this interesting concept about where's the money, honey, and talk a little bit more to our industry experts. So again, if you know an inventor out there who's got an idea and you don't want them tanking their business, send them to the Inventors Roundtable because we can put them in touch then with Mr. Raymond Burrasca for some better advice on that financing. So stick with us. We'll be right back. And thank you so much for being with us for this segment of Invent America because America invents. My guest for this segment is Mr. Raymond Burrasca, and he is our industry expert, attorney, and can answer questions for our inventors when the first thing I do when somebody says, oh, I'm looking for an investor, is like, nope, nope, nope. You need to talk to Ray first and have him point you in a better direction. And so for a lot of the inventors, just being able to take that deep breath and realize that taking on an investor man, I have seen more inventors end up in a lawsuit trying to fight an investor to get them out of the contract and push back than they ever got benefit out of the investor. Why? Why is that so?
Because people don't like to lose their money. It doesn't matter how generous they appear, even if they look like your Uncle Elmer. The point is that they expect you to pay them back whatever it is they've loaned you or invested in you, plus a return on that investment. And one of the things that we learned early on is that one of the best ways to ruin a relationship with family members is to try to make them your investors. In addition, there's something else that people need to understand. We hear a lot of talk. If they're talking about startups, a lot of times they're talking about venture capital, but frequently they can be talking about what's called an accredited investor. And the accredited investors are colloquially referred to as angels. Well, let me tell you a story about angels, and this is true. Before the dot-coms imploded at the end of the 1990s, there were true angel investors. They were people who would meet you, listen to your stories, listen to your pitch, like you, come to like you personally, and based on their assessment of your character, would actually invest in you and in your idea or your business. What happened, unfortunately, was venture capital became very sophisticated very early on. And so what they realized is they could put sucker money in first by having angels invest in the very first round of outside investment. And so that's what they did. They allowed all of these angels, these good-hearted individuals who were just looking to help people and get their money back plus a return. They put them into the first round of financing. And then what would happen is the startup would start to trail a little bit. Its operations would start to deflate a little bit. And so the second round of money that would come in would be venture capital money, very greedy money, and they would make the original round of angel investors take a hit in order for the company to get the new money. Then, to add insult to injury, when the IPO window was about to close, what happened was the venture capitalists either sold off their shares in these companies to other companies, or they IPO'd the business, but they made the angels sign lockup agreements, which disabled them from selling their shares for the first 6 months after the IPO. So what was the net effect of all of those betrayals? After the dot-coms imploded, the angels were out of money. They were destitute, they were broken, and their backs were broken by venture capital in essence. So what happened as a consequence of that, these accredited investors didn't go away. They banded together as groups, and they started to adopt the venture capital guidelines. So guess what? Those accredited investors these days are not angels. They look more like devils, and they act more like devils. And they certainly are no better than venture capital.
Well, one of the things that I've seen is when, an inventor does take angel money or investor money, is it for the amount of money they got, they gave away too much of the company. Because in the beginning, 10% of nothing is still nothing. And so they'll want a bigger percentage. Well, let's say then the business grows, and now you've got somebody that's telling you what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. And they say that they own, 51% of the company because they gave you $50,000. And now it's way out of balance because they should have given you, you should have been able to give them for that amount of money, 2% of the company.
Not only that, but when you actually follow, let's say, the venture capital trail, and it inevitably requires more than a single round of financing. So you're talking about multiple rounds of financing, maybe as much as 4 or 5 different rounds of financing. When you finally get to that final round of financing, everybody else has been squeezed down in order to get to that final round. And so what happens as a consequence of that is that it's very hard for the management of the company, so the inventor, let's say, and his fellow team members. It's very hard for them at that point to hold on to much of the company at all. So the average percentage of the company that a management team, this is a management team, so this includes not only the inventor, but all of his business development people, his lawyer, you name it, 4 or 5 different people. The management team only walks away with 15%. So the inventor ends up with maybe 3-4% of what ultimately was his whole idea, his whole passion. And when you look at it from that perspective, because you don't get to cash out until the very end, okay? When you look at that perspective, from that perspective, he's better off with a license agreement than he is with actually going through all of the heartache and turmoil and years of investment required to build a company from scratch and then take outside investment in.
Well, there you go, everybody. As we wrap up this episode of Invent America, you know what? License it, license it, license it, because it's going to get you money in your pocket faster, and you are going to have a lot less heartache, and your spouse is going to be happier with you because now you get to use that discretionary income to go on vacation someplace. So take her to a nice beach, and we will be back next week and talking to some more inventors and talking about that process and cool new products and where you can go and get them. So take care, everybody. And Mr. Michael King and King Productions, thank you so much for letting us be on the air. And you get well now, Mr. King. We need you. Take care, everybody, and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We will be back next week with more stories on getting products from mind to market. We will have new inventors and industry experts. So join us and have a wonderful week.